Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the unfolding situation with 7 new hostages that were taken in Cameroon, presumably over the border into Nigeria in the north of Cameroon. With us to talk about it, Cameroonian journalist Louis Kemayou of Télé Sud. Also with us, Emmanuel Goujon, Africa consultant at Africa Global Approach, and France 24 politics editor Mark Perlman. Mark, we were talking just before the break about hostages. The French, they have now 15 hostages in sub-Saharan Africa. Why is it that the French have more hostages than everyone else?
Well, maybe because the hostages are valuable. The most valuable probably on the African market, if I may say so, because France has declared war on the Islamist groups in the Sahel region, also elsewhere. There was a hostage who was taken in Somalia, actually was killed after a botched operation to rescue him. But clearly, they're sought after targets. And this is why the French government is telling French citizens, don't go to the region. Now the region is becoming basically half of the continent. And this is really why we're seeing this. We have hostages now who were taken in Niger, in Mali, in Nigeria, and now in Cameroon. So it makes a lot of hostages in different places. And this is why France is becoming a target. And this is no surprise. All the terrorist groups in the area have said, you know, France is our enemy. They said it before the war in Mali. So of course, now that the French troops are on the ground, after promises that there would never be a ground intervention, this is making French nationals a big fat target.
Emmanuel Goujon, again, I ask you the same question as before. Is it because for ideological reasons that France is the big enemy? Or is it because, well, that the French pay? We know that investigating magistrate Marc Trévédic told in a radio interview that the average price is $5 million per hostage, and that the French have a reputation of paying up.
Yeah, but I think there is also a question of politics and ideology from the Islamist part. I remember when I met one of the leaders at the time of Boko Haram in 2006, January, in Maiduguri. He told me that the worst enemy of Islam in the world is France, because France is the country that invented secularism. We say it in French, laïcité. He said that the worst enemy of Islam in the world is France.
Was he just saying that because you're French, or did he really mean it?
Maybe, but I think he was really meaning it, in the sense that we separated the state and the law from the religion, and we accept all the religions. When these people, all these terrorists, what they want, Islamists, I mean extremist Islamists, all they want is to set up a regime ruled by the Sharia, the Islamic law. That's all they want. And so they don't accept countries, people who think otherwise.
Louis Kemayou, the agenda of groups like Boko Haram, do they strike a chord?
No, they are looking for money. They
no,
don't
but
have
do people in Nigeria and Cameroon, do some of them subscribe to that?
No, they don't subscribe. They don't subscribe. They are really careful about them. They don't subscribe, but the fact is that they are looking for some money. They need money to do it. You are talking about secularism. There is another fact. When you say people should not wear some clothes, especially, it is only in France you have that. It's a crime only in France. And the other fact is that when you consider the situation...
So the argument about the veil that we have in this country is one of the factors that's, that you think has perked their anger.
Yes, of course. When France intervened in Mali, they said it was not against terrorists. They said it was against Islamism. So they were fighting against France because France is fighting Islamism. So the target is very clear.
Right. But another point, maybe, sorry, is that in the northern part of Nigeria, there are about a dozen of states that have included Sharia in their rule. It was a big fight in the early 2000s, and they decided that they will rule this region, because it's a federal state, Nigeria, according to Islam. And so there has been a lot of problems also with the local populations. Like, for example, women cannot travel around on the moto taxi, you know, this small motorcycle that are carrying people around, unless it's a woman driving it, which does not exist. So there are plenty of things like that. They of course have unallowed also alcohol in Katsina, in Maiduguri, in places like that. You cannot find easily alcohol unless you are in a military barrack, which is federal, so from Lagos and from the south. You understand? So it's a very complicated situation also for these states and government in the whole area. In Mali, for example, mainly Muslim country, they didn't want to have the Sharia imposed. They were in the same kind of culture like France of secularism, to separate the two things, you know. And even some people complained when they were occupied by the Islamists in northern Mali. They complained that they were cutting arms and forcing the women to wear the veil and everything, because it's not in their culture either, you know. Islam came in that part of Africa only in the 19th century.
All right. So, when you went to Maiduguri, right? What would you say were, how many people seemed to you to really back Boko Haram at the time?
At the time, they were a very small minority. They had about 200 followers. But one of their leaders, Mohamed Yusuf was his name, he was killed in 2009 when the militaries in Nigeria decided to make big reprisals against Boko Haram and to kill most of them. That guy was killed as well. He was a big and famous leader, sheikh, as they say, and he was teaching about 3,000 students. So this youth could be also new members of Boko Haram nowadays, you know. Another thing is that nowadays, especially right currently, the federal government of Nigeria is trying to negotiate with Boko Haram, some of Boko Haram leaders. They have asked for amnesty, they have asked for money in order to pay back the families of their dead, you know. So it's a very complicated situation.
And I mean, adding to the French factor is the fact, not in Nigeria clearly, but in the Sahel region, especially the main group, the strongest group, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, was originally an Algerian group. And clearly there is this notion that the Algerian Islamists have a special grudge against France for obvious historical reason, the former colonial power, when the Islamists first rose in Algeria in the 1990s, France cooperated with the Algerian security services to crack down in France, but also in Algeria. So clearly the fact that the leading forces in the Sahel region came from Algeria and still have Algerian leaders is a factor. And clearly we saw the consequences in this major hostage situation in the Algerian oil field several weeks ago. Clearly the fact that it's also coming from Algeria is a factor in the fact that you have France as a target.
Emmanuel Goujon, what is, in your view, the profile of a militant of Boko Haram, of Ansaru?
Talking about Boko Haram, I think the average militant is a young guy who has followed up maybe a little bit university, maybe like 2 years in university, who speaks English, who is a very Muslim, who could not find a job, most probably who come from a very poor family, very poor background also, socially speaking, and who is trying to find his own way between the two contradictions, we can say, consumerism society and Islam. And the only way he finds is that kind of adventure, kind of profile he can find in Boko Haram, because they are proposing him action, movement, money, and maybe a reward in the paradise, in heaven, you know. So that's, I would say, the profile of that kind of militant. But you have also big guys, the big bosses of that kind of movement, who have a special agenda, maybe who come from Niger or from Saudi Arabia or Qatar or wherever, who receive money and so on and so forth.
Louis Camaillou?
Yes, I totally agree with him. The fact is that they are not only poor people, not educated. Now you have lots of them who have money, because they need also to fill those who follow them. So they need also to have money and to have some contacts abroad.
The French president, by the way, and you mentioned it in part one of our discussion, announcing about this hostage taking this Tuesday, also announcing the killing of a French legionnaire in the mountains of northern Mali, the mountains where 7 French hostages might be, for all we know. And this was during an intense firefight, a firefight that François Hollande said when he was speaking earlier from Athens was still ongoing. He described his country's objectives in Mali as it gets set to hand over operations to African forces.
We have almost reached all our objectives. The only thing left is this last phase, in which we are going to capture the leaders of these terrorist groups in the far north of Mali. Then in a few weeks, we are going to reduce our presence. The African forces are growing in numbers and strength. Almost 5,000 African soldiers are now in Mali. We are 4,000, and this number will fall bit by bit as the African forces replace the French forces.
We're pleased to welcome on the phone now the French Minister for Citizens Abroad, Hélène Conway-Mouret. Thank you for joining us. You just heard the French president say in the wake of this latest hostage taking that the idea is to take out some key people in northern Mali and then quickly hand over, he said, in the coming weeks. Do you think that he'll be able to stick to that timetable?
Well, this is the plan. I mean, he's the French president, and he's given the orders to the French troops who are there in Mali, and I have no doubt that he has every intention to put his plan into action. This was, you see, from the start, it was never the intention of France to move into Mali on its own. We had a plan for the training of the Malian troops, and that was to be done by European forces. So the French move to Mali now is to come to an end once its mission is finished.
We were mentioning earlier how the French now have 15 hostages in sub-Saharan Africa, and is it? And there is this reputation that the French pay for ransom money. Is the French strategy for getting those hostages released to pay?
No, I think the least we say on this topic, the better. As you know, diplomacy normally is carried out behind closed doors, and I think François Hollande has actually said on a few occasions that this was not the policy of this government to pay out ransoms, and this is not the intention to do so. Now, what we have there, we're dealing with terrorists, people who strike at any time, anywhere, and we have really the proof of their actions. We don't know so far what their intentions are, if it's just because they were French citizens, maybe to blackmail the French government to stop their action. We don't actually know what's going to happen, so maybe let's not speculate, because as you said, we have 15 people and it's 15 lives that we need to save and secure.
Hélène Conway-Mouret, one final question for you. This took place in a national park in the north of Cameroon. Louis Kumayu was describing what a beautiful place it is, popular among tourists. Does it mean that once again, perhaps in a way, the jihadists, the Salafists have won, in the sense that this is another area that's going to become a no-go zone?
Well, you see, we have taken measures to secure our schools, our embassies, and we cannot secure national parks. I mean, you know, of course, these people want to induce fear. They want to, I suppose, take power over space, which is what they want by frightening people. What we need to do today is just to make sure that our French citizens are not overexposed and that they take every measure themselves for their own security. So it's not a matter of not being able to get out anymore, but maybe in certain regions, and certainly that one now, to be extremely vigilant, and that's the instructions we have sent to them.
Hélène Conway-Mouret, thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Mark Proman, you heard the minister there speaking. Did it surprise you when the French intervened because of the fact that there are those 7 hostages that were being held and the French went into Mali anyway? Yeah,
it seemed a contradiction that if you have hostages, you want to be careful and not make the hostage takers angry. And this, François Hollande made a rather daring move by saying, you know, we shouldn't really care about this. We have something we need to do. We need to root out those terrorists because they're taking hold of a big chunk of Mali, and we need to see them out. And so he went into Mali and saying, basically, those are different issues. Now, what he's hoping is certainly not to negotiate. It seems that there was a lot of time to do this, but to maybe try to rescue them and in those who have been detained for a while and are allegedly in the very far north of Mali. But clearly there is a risk, because if either those hostages or this family of hostages, including children for the first time, something bad happens to them, this could really be a problem, a political problem on his hands.
What's your prediction, Emmanuel Goujon?
Prediction, I'm not very good for prediction, but there is different scenarios. The first one is that the hostage takers will claim this operation, and maybe we will know then that it's Boko Haram, and then it will be up mainly to the Nigerian government to negotiate with them the release of the French citizens. And as there are some negotiations going on now between the Nigerian government and Boko Haram, we might have such chances that it will succeed. Another situation, a worse one, would be that these people are not Boko Haram. The kidnappers are not Boko Haram militants, but are, for example, let's say former Chadian soldiers who are preparing a rebel movement, or mafia groups coming from northern Mali or northern Sahara, and then going through Mali and maybe to Sudan. You know, these people, and that's one of the main points I would like to underline here, is that they don't know any border. Again, I remember I've said that sometimes back here at this same table, but they don't know any border. So for them to move from Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, even Darfur, they don't care. For them, they can move wherever they want. They speak the same language, either Arabic or Hausa. They can move everywhere in the area. They find support everywhere as well through the Islamist network. And so they can do whatever they want. And the only way for us to fight against these Islamists is what President Hollande has decided, is to intervene, to prevent any safe haven for them inside Africa. Because if they had managed to settle down for a longer time inside Africa, like in northern Mali, for example, the consequences would have been even worse. I think we reacted too late, but I think that was the only move we could do.
All right, we're out of time, but I want to thank you, Louis Koumayu. I want to thank Marc Perlman, Emmanuel Goujon for being with us, and we want to thank you for joining us here. It's a story we'll continue to follow on France 24.